Hi, I'm Katie, and this is episode 44 of Ornamentations, which is a celebration of the coming of spring. It's not quite here yet in Northern California. We have another atmospheric river headed right at us, so lots of rain and wind, but hopefully no more power outages. Those have been kind of a problem. But spring stitching is definitely here, and that's what we'll be looking at today. I have the launch of the spring Flosstube kit, Tulip Festival. I also wanted to share with you some of my favorite spring smalls, past and present, and then we'll look at my current stitching. I have a very big, very surprising new start to share with you. I think you'll love it. I love it. I'm very excited. And then we'll also have an update on the progress of my Britomart casket. I have been doing a lot of very productive stitching in the last couple weeks, so I have a great deal to share with you today. And then we'll finish off with a new giveaway. I will be giving away a copy of the Tulip Festival chart to celebrate the release of the spring Flosstube kit, and that's where we'll start today. So Tulip Festival is now available on my website. The kit is $64 and it includes everything but the chart. So we've got the ground linen, the silk satin backing fabric that I used in my own finish, and then all threads used, which is a beautiful, very versatile collection of rich, gorgeous colors that absolutely sing on the Himalayan fog, which is the ground linen. However, the kit is limited availability. Only the kit's in stock. I will not be restocking these or taking pre-orders because of the limited availability of a couple of the threads here. So that's Tulip Festival. Kit's now available. And now let's move on to some spring smalls that I pulled to share with you. I really love stitching smalls, which you've probably noticed if you have been a long time viewer of my channel. Mostly Christmas smalls. I'm less of a seasonal stitcher, but I do really love the colors of spring, so I have done a few of those. And I think that smalls have so much appeal because those little projects give you regular finishes, and that feeling of achievement, at least for me, helps me keep going on my bigger project. So that's been my Britomart casket seen behind me on the bookcases. But for you, that could just as easily be a large sampler or another project. So I love the feeling of having lots of finishes, and like I said, it fuels my big projects. So that's one of the reasons I really enjoy stitching smalls. Also, there are so many great charts out there. I was watching Brenda and Laura's last episode. They had a little parade of spring charts themselves, and I really enjoyed all the Not Forgotten Farm and Scattered Seeds sampler charts that they showed. So I've put on an order with Not Forgotten Farm, and we'll see what I purchase next time. It hasn't arrived yet. I need to expand some of my choices because, there was some great stuff there. If you haven't seen Brenda and Laura's latest episode, you should really check it out. You probably have if you're watching me. But let's get to my own spring smalls. So most of these are from last year, and we'll start with last year's spring Flosstube kit. This is Brenda Gervais, the Rabbit and the Rose, stitched in silk. So the conversion on this one was exclusive to the kit. It's now retired, but it is such a beautiful little piece. And then I did cut turkey stitch in Swalwell to give the bunny a little fluffy tail, one of my favorite details on this. So I actually stitched the Rabbit and the Rose twice in two slightly different colorways. I gave the other one to my mom for Easter. I also stitched Brenda Gervais' Harrietta and Company. I gave it to her for Mother's Day. Unfortunately, I didn't think to get it from her for this episode, but I'll link that episode in the description. So if you're looking for some spring silk conversions, you can check that one out. Another spring silk conversion that was shared on my Flosstube is Brenda Gervais' Seasons of the Heart Spring. I finished this with a little beaded looped edging. That's 2mm crystal golden shadow. It goes beautifully with Fuller's Teazel, which was the ground linen used here. Again, silk satin backing, very predictable in that way. And I think this might have been my favorite Seasons of the Heart, just because the pinks, the greens, that highlight blue, it's just, oh, such a lovely little piece. It goes beautifully with my other spring stitches. I love the colors, so that's a really beautiful little piece. And then I'll link back to the conversion for Seasons of the Heart Spring. Again, if you're looking for some spring silk conversions that you might enjoy stitching, this one's really fun. And then also, less obviously spring, I think this is mostly because of the colors and the linen that I used, but this was my sampler September stitch, and this is Plum Street Samplers My Early Days, stitched on 5363 Legacy Linen Sicilian Marzipan on an older dye lot that's got some very pinky peachy tones, subtle ones. It's not in your face pink, but that and the lovely delicate flowers, the floral border, and then those graceful flowering trees really makes me think of spring. It goes beautifully with my other spring stitches, although I will be keeping this out through summer and probably fall as well, because I'm very, very proud of my super tiny stitching. Oh, it turned out beautifully. I absolutely love this piece. And again, finished as a pillow, stuffed with wool roving, backed with silk satin, because I am entirely predictable. This is an original silk conversion as well. This is all soie surfine, and I will link back to that conversion as well. I loved stitching My Early Days. This is the kind of thing I go bananas over because of all the natural elements. Flowers, trees, those are my absolute favorite things to stitch. So that's Plum Street Samplers, My Early Days. All of these you have seen before, but I thought I'd also share with you today another one. This is the circus embroidery piece. I finished the stitching, I haven't actually fully finished it, and this is quite an old project. I did this several years ago, and the story behind this is that there's a designer called Olympia Latan who makes embroidered book cover clutch bags. They're incredibly expensive, and I've always loved the idea because embroidery and books, my favorite things together. Oh, heaven. But a few years ago, she branched out into paintings, and she did a clutch. There are photos still available. I will link that in the description so you can see the original, that I just loved the idea of, but the colors were wrong. And you know how I am about color. So I decided to have a go at stitching Botticelli's Birth of Venus. Oops, no, opened to the wrong Botticelli painting. So this is the original painting. And what was so charming about the Olympia Latan piece was that this is such a sophisticated painting, so many wonderful details, amazing shading, and yet the what I can almost call kind of a crude rendering in felt and floss had a charm all its own. So this is my own version, which I tried to more closely approximate the colors, do a little more detail in the stitching, but I did keep the essential basics of using felt to build up your shapes and your colors, and then working over it with different flosses. So that's her shell, the water. I had a lot of fun with her hair. Her face isn't quite right, but the hair, I think I used, oh, I don't know, 6 or 7 different colors of floss, and then just kept building them up to get her hair, and then over embroidered the trees with Lazy Daisy stitches. Had some fun with her handmaiden's hair as well. Embroidered her dress and her drape. So looks finished. Not actually finished. I was going to do this after the style of her book clutches, and then I got as far as cutting the pieces for the sides, and then when they didn't quite fit, I just threw this aside and I fit a pick. But I hope now that I have shamed myself for keeping this unfinished rock hard board for years on end, that I will actually put in the not that much time required to actually FFO this. It's the perfect size actually to store greeting cards, so I keep this in my bedroom and fill it with some of my favorite, most meaningful cards that I have received over the years. So this really makes me think of spring because, you know, the flowers, the beautiful spring colors. So I thought that was an appropriate addition to the spring smalls parade. So that's my felt and floss version of Botticelli's Birth of Venus. I'm actually really pleased with how that came out. It mostly did what I was attempting to do. Not too pleased with the face on Venus there, but you can't have everything in life. So hopefully I will actually FFO this and then be able to show it to you sometime. There's really not much left to be done on it. It's ridiculous that it's not fully finished, but you know how life is. You move on to the next thing and you just don't. Oh, another thing I really want to finish. So you've seen this before, but I have a couple of Jackie Duplessis Mother of Pearl pinky kits, including a tulip, perfect for spring. And I'd love to finish this as well and then maybe display it with my spring smalls. That'd be lovely. So that's also on my to-do list. I will want to take bets on whether or not these things will actually happen. Been a little busy with other projects, but whips. So yeah, I didn't have a ton of spring smalls to share, but I hope you enjoyed seeing the ones that I did have. When last we spoke, I was working on a couple of projects, one of which was Modern Folk Embroideries Home Sweet Home, stitched with beautiful Soie Gobelins 575, which is gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous rich aubergine purple that I cannot recommend enough. I'm in love with this color. On 37 count legacy linen Russian TK. And as we discussed, I love the design, I love the materials. I really wasn't feeling this project. I did keep plugging away at it, as you can see, until something showed up and caused a major squirrel moment, so much so that you can see I just got my thread dangling. When I switch projects, I try to at least finish my thread off before I run off to the next thing, but I have now just about finished the house. It looks amazing. I've carried one of the borders all the way down, the other one's almost there. And a commenter who has also stitched this piece said that she felt many of the same things until she got the border down and was able to turn it, and then she really kind of got into a groove with this pattern. So when I pick this back up again, it is being set aside for the moment. I'm hoping that the same thing will happen to me because I do love this piece. I just haven't really been able to fully throw myself into it. And then a question I received on thread, how much thread was I using? So as you can see, I'm pretty far along, but I'm not done, and I'm almost through a full spool of Gobelins. So I think that this is going to take one and a bit. So 2 spools, but definitely not 2 full spools, because as you can see, I'm pretty far along, and a lot of the big stitching in the house has already been done. So at some point I'll get back to Home Sweet Home, but I did really enjoy reading your comments and your insights about why I wasn't feeling that project. And that was actually really interesting, very thought-provoking. You had some very interesting thoughts about that. But we'll get back to that in just a second because I'm not following my own outline. I totally just blew past haul. So I don't actually have any strictly stitchy haul, but I did buy something that I think might be of interest to you as people who stitch. That distinction will make sense in a minute. So as I mentioned, atmospheric rivers, we had 2 pretty significant storms hit since my last Flosstube. The first one knocked out my parents' power for multiple days. I had power the whole time, so they were over here charging their devices, eating, using the internet. You know, at least one of us had power, so that was a lot to be thankful for. And then a week later, another atmospheric river hit, and that knocked out my power. So I bought something to deal with that because, it's really inconvenient not to have power. You don't realize how much we depend on light and the internet and hot water heaters and all of that until you're dark for the day. And this is a power bank. Mine is by Anchor, and I bought one of the heavy duty ones, aka more expensive, that can power your laptop, your light, multiple devices. So the reason I think this would be of interest to you as a stitcher is that you charge these. You can get a set that comes with a wall charger and a cable. And if your power gets knocked out, which is why I actually bought this, then you at least have something to get you through, you know, charging your phone and immediate needs. But it would also be really great for retreats because you could pre-charge this, plunk this on the table, and then instead of a mess of extension cords and different chargers, you can just plug your cords right into this and it can power your light and your phone and basically everything you would need for on-the-go charging. So I thought that might be of interest. If not, ignore me. We'll get back to stitching. But yeah, now prepared for what is hopefully not going to be another power outage because, that's not the greatest thing. But anyways, getting back to your comments. So some really interesting things were said about why I wasn't getting into Home Sweet Home. A few people thought that it was a single dark color, that I have so clearly enjoyed a rich variety of colors in my silk conversions that I was really feeling the lack of green and the lack of other colors. And I think you guys may have been right because another one of my new silks showed up and it caused a squirrel moment for the ages, let me tell you. So in the last episode we talked about how I've had some new colors of silk commissioned in Gobelins for use in the Flosstube kits. Those have been coming in regularly, and then not long after my last episode, a fabulous new green came in. Does this look like me distilled in a thread or what? I saw this and I just could not wait to get started with this. So I tossed poor Home Sweet Home and went total squirrel on a very big new start with the idea of showcasing this fabulous new green. So I went ahead and started Plum Street Samplers this happy morning. I mean, talk about a chart to showcase a really good green. This is it. Also showcase some really good reds, but more on that in a minute. And then this is my start. I was a little under the weather for a couple days, so I just sat in bed and stitched and made quite a lot of progress. I was like, oh my god, it doesn't look like anything when you think about how much grass that is to stitch. This piece is Oh, pretty serious. I know that many of you are very serious sampler stitchers and this probably doesn't look that big to you, but I don't love block stitching, so I'm gonna find this one a challenge. Also, just sidebar, this is 38 count and the stitch count is 254 by 244, so it's not that much bigger than my early days, which I think was about 215 square, but check out the size differential between 5363 and 38 count. It's pretty hilarious. So as you can see, I have taken the border all of the way around and then started on the grass. I figured since that's the part I will like the least, although I do absolutely adore those rich greens, that's gonna be just amazing when it's finished. And then I will reward myself as I make progress on the grass by starting to fill in some of the other elements. So because I'm a big idiot and I love green too much and I don't know a good thing when I see it, I'm not gonna take the out offered by Paulette on this chart. So she has very thoughtfully given a break in the green to insert a verse. This is also a lovely little callback to Historic Samplers where you would often see a break in the green where the girl might have filled in her name and the date. It saves you from a lot of block stitching, but like I said, I'm a big idiot who loves green too much. So what I'm going to do is actually carry the filler trees all the way across the bottom. And this is all going to be grass. I might have this finished in time for Sampler September, 2024, 2025. We'll see. I am making, that's pretty good progress for under 2 weeks of stitching, I do have to say. I did also have quite an oops. So I carried the border around and then the minute I was here and could start on the grass, I knew I had to get going. So I carried that first row of grass across and found that it met up horizontally, but I was off by one vertical thread. And unlike most more experienced sampler stitchers, I didn't just do the structure as I went. I did all of the leaves and everything. So I had a quick look at the border to see if I could figure out where I had gone over 3 threads instead of 2. I couldn't find it. I'm sure I will at some point, but I decided to fudge it because I wasn't gonna take all that out. So right here, and you can see that, but I think it will disappear when you're looking at it from a distance. I decided to just go over 3 threads, just down that whole row, and that makes everything meet up. Now the border meets up, so I just had to do a corrector. Over 3, it's not ideal. It is, however, very historically accurate. So I have been studying 17th century band samplers, preparation for an upcoming project, and one thing I've seen is a whole lot of over 3. And Jacob actually discussed this in his most recent Flosstube. That's Jacob of Modern Folk Embroidery, how much you see things that aren't necessarily over 2 on historic samplers, and how often these girls did end up fudging their borders, and sometimes by going over a different number of threads. So I'm telling myself that I'm just being historically accurate here. Actually, I'm just lazy, but I have all that grass to do, so I decided that I was just going to fudge the border, and that was the way it was going to be. So, I can't say enough about how much I absolutely adore this green. I did think about starting this on cloister cream. However, I have cut that up so much between the bells of Christmas and all my sparkle brim that I didn't have a big enough piece in hand. and I had to start this, the second my green showed up. So I went for Fuller's Teazel instead, which is an old friend, and the green certainly does sing on it. It's getting a little washed out here, but it's actually got quite a nice rich color that I think interacts really well with green and with the reds. So as you can see, I've been focusing on the greens, but there are also some really wonderful reds in this pattern, and then I'm going to do some good pinks as well. So I think this is going to be a beautiful conversion, and then this is going to be a chance to do some really gorgeous reds. I haven't picked my reds yet. This is definitely going to be the dark red. I think just the rich luminous colors here are going to be the real star of this piece. And then once I actually get to that, I'll see which of the lighter reds works best. Sometimes you do need a little more separation in shades than you think, or they start blending into each other, especially with thread. So that's Plum Street Samplers this happy morning. Oh man, sometimes when I look at the size of this thing, I don't know what I'm thinking because I don't enjoy block stitching. I'm convinced that Paulette Stewart must have some magic powers because this is the third one within a 12-month period that has involved a lot of block stitching and that I have happily taken on. So my early days also featured some pretty serious grass. Not as serious as this, but ooh, whole lot of block stitching on 5363, and I loved it. I finished. And then this Joyous Season is, again, not as big as this, but had some block stitching too. The snow was no joke on that piece, and yet I finished that and loved it as well. So I think there's something about Paulette's patterns that just really speaks to me and drives me to take on things I might not otherwise want to undertake. Also the green was impossible to resist, but oh, you know, whatever. And then, oh, one other thing I'd like to point out about this is that there is actually some variation in the border. So it's even, and then you get a few points here and here where there are some irregularities. I really like that. I think it keeps it from looking too perfect, too, you know, computer generated. You can see the hand of the designer and her artistic choices. So just that little tiny bit of variation kind of breaks it up and gives you some variety, a little bit of relief. So that's actually one of the pleasures of stitching a big chart like this, is getting to know the chart so well and seeing the designer's choices and getting to appreciate them. So Plum Street Samplers this happy morning. Big whip. We'll see how I do with the grass. Stay tuned on that. Oh, last thing. So the first time I discussed this chart, I said I thought it would be display friends with Summerhill. There's kind of a scale issue here. So I'm not sure those are going to display together quite as well as I thought, but you know, this could like be in a bowl or a tray sitting in front of the framed piece. So I'll make it work somehow. But anyways, I am going to clear some of this away and then bring on Britomart. Britomart! I'm excited. I have a lot of progress to share with you. So we last looked at this panel in the previous Flosstube episode. And since then, I have kept working productively. Sometimes working on casket stitching means just cutting out what I stitch because I hate it. But this time I have actually kept in all the stitching I've done, and I now have 6 of the 7 figures on the back panel completed and ready to share with you. So when we last saw this, hope and desire were finished, but I had only a tiny start on the figure of Fancy right here, and then the cloaked figure of Doubt was nothing but drawn lines on the fabric. So I started first with Fancy, who is supposed to be a figure dressed in feathers with a feathered headdress. So I'm going to review the video after filming, and I may insert photos at points here because it can be a little hard to see some of the details with all of the light in here. It does wash out some of the subtleties. Like for instance, Doubt is just looking like a big dark blob right now. There is actually more color subtlety in there than that. So the figure of Fancy is supposed to have feathers, and then my favorite feature, at least in my head, was the feathered cape. So my plan was to stitch this as overlapping feathers, which I would then over detail. So I got this far, started with the detailing, and just could not find something that I liked, so I left it as just the pattern created by stitching the plain silk. I do actually wish that I had stuck with my original idea here, which was to stitch it solid and then stitch swooping peacock feathers down it. Now I could actually still do that. It would require taking all of this out and then stitching it flat and then over stitching. However, oh my gosh, I am so close to a finish on this panel. I just could not bring myself to do it, and I do find the interaction of the three shades here really beautiful, so I decided to just keep it and move on. And with that, I went on to Doubt, who has worked in 3 shades of purple and red, including the darkest color 575, which you know already in Gobelins from Home Sweet Home. It also comes in Soie de Paris, and then that made up the darkest shade in my progression here. Sorry, I'm trying to grab all 3 at once and not drop anything. So these are the 3 shades I used. I found that the most natural shade friends for 575, which is a purple with a great deal of gray, were actually dark reds. Those shaded together really nicely, although you can, when you actually start stitching them together, just how much gray is in 575 becomes really apparent. So I ended up using it basically as what I would call a shadow color. So that's 575 right there on the shadow of the hood, and then I've used the darker reds to fill in the rest and try to get some detail on the folds of the cloak. Yeah, see, this is just looking uniformly dark, so I'll probably insert some photos. One thing I have done on this panel that I did with the last one is that I have taken progress photos at every stage, and then when this panel is complete, I will clip them together into a video so you can literally see how this grew stitch by stitch. I find it fascinating. It's a little geeky, but hopefully you'll like it as well. I also put in some work on Amaranth, so I did stitch her final blood drop over Doubt's cloak once that was in. She was originally supposed to have another drape coming out of her hair, as seen on my original drawing here. That had to be worked as a separate piece of needle lace so that it could essentially fly over the very textured ground of the drape behind her. But as I was working on it, I had this sitting up on my frame uncovered, and I was just looking at how beautiful and uniformly shiny like that. That's what I was seeing, the beautiful glow and the luster of the silk. And needle lace would have a different texture and character to it. It's beautiful, but it's would break up the shiny uniformity of her figure basically. So I decided to actually just leave that off, mark Amaret complete. And then I also did a little bit of work on Britomart. I finished her helmet. She does still need her sword, but that will go on absolutely last on this panel because it's a detached pointy piece that will catch on threads when you're trying to work. So I put the side plate piece on her helmet, and then I stitched her feathers, which I'm not entirely happy with, but I was struggling with these. This is my third go at our helmet feathers. I think they look kind of like pink raccoon tails, but as I found with Fancy, working the very flat, very shiny filament silks, I used Swalwell there in, I think it's herringbone stitch, so that it overlapped and looked like the veins of a feather. It worked a lot less well over the textured needle lace than it did over the flat stitching of Fancy's fan. So those feathers are just about perfect, and then they're a little more bumpy and less pristine when they're going over the texture of the needle lace. It did cause quite a problem. So the first 2 times I did Britomart feathered helmet, I just couldn't live with it. I cut it out and then kept going. However, on my last go, to ensure accurate placement over the needle lace, so obviously you can't draw right on top of an already stitched element, I decided to use something called thread tracing, which is where you put a design on tracing paper, very tissue paper. It's got to be very fine. I hate thread tracing because the first time I did this, I used a draft weight tracing paper. Disaster. So what you do is you pin your design on tissue paper in place, you stitch over it, and then you tear it away and use tweezers to get all of the little bits out. So that actually worked very well in the sense of getting the design onto the stitching. However, I got a little sloppy with my tweezers. I ended up pulling the needle lace and not the tracing paper, which meant that my stitching here had to be my final stitching. I could not go back and revise it further. So Britomart is the way she is. I'm not fully satisfied with her, but this is the back. So the shading on the feathers and the kind of swooping effect was meant to call back to the lid. So I've tried to create some commonalities between Britomart's portrayals on all the panels so that you can tell that this is the same character. So that's her big swooping feathers on her helmet on the lid. This, I think, is much more effective. The dark to light shading had to be reversed just so that you could actually see the colors over the needle lace drape, which unfortunately uses the same tones. One of the problems here, or multiple problems there, but yeah, so I decided to stick with the flats, although I did consider another technique that you might be interested in seeing, and this is something that's very common on 17th century stump work. So the historic designs often did feature soldiers, and in fabulous cavalier plumed helmets, and there were many ways of doing it, but it frequently involved knotting or turkey stitching flat filament silk and then cutting it and fluffing it to give these impressions of plumes. So when I had done my first 2 attempts at Britomart's feathers and didn't like them, I decided to go back to 17th century pieces. This is from a Witney Antiques catalog, Golden Age. It's got some wonderful pieces in here. I bought this on the secondary market a few years ago. Highly recommend it. And looked at all the ways 17th century embroiderers did plumed helmets. However, that's very textured. It's got more relief, and as this panel is very uniformly flat, I thought it might be too distracting. So I stuck with the oval, worked in the same way I had done on Fancy. It kind of connects disparate elements on the panel, which strengthens the composition. But yeah, don't love the execution. I see raccoon tails, pink raccoon tails. However, the excellent news here is that puts me down to one figure, which is Fear. So I have some ideas on how this will be worked in one color. We will see if it works. So hopefully I will be showing you some progress next time. I am certainly powering towards a finish. I've been stitching like a maniac because I can really, I can feel it. And then this right here is the figure of fear as on my original drawing. So stay tuned and then we'll see what my progress is on Britomart next time. Hopefully not just me stitching, hating it, cutting it out, stitching, hating, cutting it out. That does happen sometimes, especially at the end when you're so close to a finish that you can feel it. But fingers crossed that my stitching is more productive. So that just about brings me to the end of this episode, and the last thing we have today are giveaways. So the last Sparkle Prim pack was never claimed, so this is a remnant cut of Legacy Linen Cloister Cream, and then a spool of green silk that I used in a lot of my Sparkle Prim conversions. And I drew a new winner as the fourth winner never came forward. So the new winner is Jane Gabrielse. Sorry, I probably just mangled your last name. Please, I have commented on your original comment. Please contact me with your mailing address and I will send this out to you. So that's the new winner for Sparkle Prim. And then for today's new giveaway, I have a brand new, this is not my own copy, this is a new copy of Tulip Festival. You do not have to have bought the kit to enter for this giveaway. If you would like to stitch it, please feel free to enter. And the keyword for this will be tulip. And if you'd like extra brownie points, go ahead and tell me what your favorite spring flower or plant is. So, as I think I've mentioned before, spring is my favorite time of year in the garden when I can see so much color and the trees leafing out and some early spring blooms. So one of the reasons I wanted to use this shading particularly for the figure of doubt on my Britomart panel is that the colors remind me of the spring color of one of my favorite shrubs in my garden, which is called a Dodonia plant. And in spring, it looks like this. It's got this rich, reddish purple color to it. It changes colors throughout the year, actually. The purple lightens, it fades to kind of a red, and then in high summer, after lots of heat waves, it turns red-green. But in spring, you get rich, vivid, saturated color, and it's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful plant. So tell me what you like about spring in the garden. Use the word tulip if you'd like to win, and Tulip Festival kits, again, available on my website. That bow doesn't want to behave. Beautiful, I love it. I also really love tulips, especially as a design motif. So lots of beautiful things in spring in the garden. That does bring me to the conclusion of this episode. So for next time, I hope to have lots of progress on whips to show you. We'll see how the grass on this happy morning is coming along, if I've managed to put in any reds yet on that piece. And then I really hope we'll be taking a look at Britomart. And then I've also ordered some charts, so I think we'll have some haul to look at it as well. But I will see you next time, and until then, happy stitching.